The ground tasted like iron and dust, but Captain Ror just laughed as he spat out blood. Above him, the armored boots of the Galactic Enforcers stomped into a circle, their sharp-edged armor gleaming under the pale wreckage of the sun. One of them kicked his side, flipping him onto his back with all the ceremony of moving garbage. Ror coughed again, his broken ribs grinding painfully against each other, and with a slow, wicked smile, he whispered through cracked lips, "Backup's here!" For a heartbeat, the Enforcers hesitated. Then they burst into laughter, the sound harsh and metallic inside their helmets, echoing across the ruins of the dead city. One of them leaned down, visor glinting, and tapped Ror's shattered breastplate with the tip of a plasma rifle like he was poking a dead thing. "What? Back up. All we see is a half-dead monkey with a death wish." Another Enforcer chimed in, chuckling, "Maybe his imaginary friends are coming to save him. Should we wait or just squish him now?" Ror didn't move. He just let his head loll to the side, pretending to drift toward unconsciousness. His fingers twitched lightly in the rubble, feeling for the broken comm unit buried under the collapsed stones, the one he had hidden there 2 days ago when the situation first turned hopeless. They thought he was beaten. They thought Earth was beaten. That was their first mistake. Overhead, the thick gray clouds shifted slightly, and a low rumble whispered across the broken streets. The Enforcers paused again, less laughter this time, more glances at one another. One of them muttered something in a language Ror didn't recognize, and another responded with a nervous snort. The ground vibrated under Ror's cheek, faint but growing. The Enforcer captain barked a command, gesturing at 2 of his soldiers to scan the area, but their instruments pinged back only static and distortion. Dust rose from the broken asphalt in lazy coils. The city itself seemed to groan. Somewhere in the distance, a building groaned and collapsed, sending up a fresh plume of smoke. The Enforcers adjusted their weapons, not laughing anymore, fanning out slightly as their instincts finally stirred beneath all that arrogance. Ror opened one eye just enough to watch. He didn't need to lift a finger. Not yet. They were already too late. They were already inside the trap. One of the Enforcers swung his plasma rifle toward the horizon, peering through a crack in a ruined wall. "Nothing. It's just ruins," he said, voice sharp with forced calm. The tremors underfoot grew stronger, rhythmic now, like a heartbeat made of stone. Ror rolled onto his side with a grunt, dragging himself upright against the scorched metal pole that had once been a street light. His body screamed in protest, but he gritted his teeth and propped himself up, bleeding and broken, but smiling wider now. "You hear that?" he rasped, his voice dry and cracked. The Enforcer captain stomped toward him, annoyed, raising his rifle to smash Ror's skull in. Before he could swing, a deep mechanical roar ripped through the haze, cutting the air like a blade. Heads snapped around. Down the ruined boulevard, emerging from the smoke and fire, came a shape no Enforcer had ever expected to see again. It was an ancient Earth mech, battered and scarred, its left arm dragging slightly from some old battle wound, but its reactor core burning bright blue beneath layers of patched metal. Scrolled across its chest plate, barely visible under grime and soot, were the faded words, "Property of Earth Resistance Unit 17. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Whispers of Time channel. Before we start, I hope you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so that you receive all the new content, and also share the story with your friends so it reaches as many people as possible. And if you have a story, write it in the comments. Maybe we'll choose one to narrate in the next video. Let's start the story. Pay attention, because there's a small detail that might change your entire perspective and awareness of life. And behind it, scrambling over the wreckage, came humans. Real humans. Some were in piecemeal armor made from salvaged alien tech. Others wore old military gear decades out of date. Their weapons mismatched and ugly. But their eyes burned with fire. And every one of them was grinning like a wolf spotting wounded prey. The Enforcers recoiled, stepping back unconsciously. Their scanners flickered and died as the mech's jamming field washed over them. One of them cursed, raising a plasma cannon toward the advancing machine, but it was too slow. A harpoon launcher fired from the mech's right arm, punching straight through the Enforcer's torso and pinning him to a wall like an insect in a collection. Panic rippled through the Enforcer squad. They shouted commands, their formation breaking apart as snipers hidden in the rubble opened fire, targeting joints and exposed optics with ruthless precision. Explosions rocked the ground, throwing dust and debris into the air. The Enforcers had shields, armor, superior firepower, and none of it mattered. They were being hunted now on a planet they thought they had already conquered. Ror forced himself to his feet fully, staggering, but upright, every breath a knife in his lungs. He watched as the Enforcers tried to rally, shouting at one another in desperation. It was like watching overconfident predators realize they had wandered into another hunter's territory. He limped forward a few steps, dragging his battered body with sheer stubbornness, and picked up a discarded alien pistol. It hummed in his hand, alien tech adapted to a human's grip by necessity. Ror tilted his head, studying the chaos with something close to amusement. The Enforcer captain finally spotted him again and pointed. "Kill him! Kill that human!" he shrieked, voice breaking. Ror smiled, the expression slow and cruel, and fired once. The shot wasn't aimed at the captain. It wasn't aimed at any of the Enforcers. It hit the crumbling statue at the center of the square, a relic of the old city, long since abandoned. The impact triggered a chain reaction. Charges planted days earlier detonated in sequence, collapsing the entire plaza into a smoking crater. Half the Enforcer squad vanished into the pit before they could even scream. The rest staggered back, stunned, some firing wildly into the smoke. And through that smoke came more humans pouring out of hidden tunnels and bunkers, moving with military precision. Old veterans, young fighters, cybernetic warriors whose bodies were more metal than flesh. Earth's broken sons and daughters. The Enforcer captain backed away, his rifle shaking slightly. "Impossible," he muttered. "They said the resistance was crushed. They said." Ror limped closer, ignoring the blood soaking his side, the pain screaming in his bones. "They lied," he said quietly, voice almost lost under the roar of battle. "They always lie. You should have listened when I said backup was coming." In the distance, another low rumble began. Not from the mech, not from the fighters, but from the sky itself. A dark shape moved among the clouds. Ror looked up, and his battered heart gave a triumphant thud. The first of Earth's surviving fleets were coming home. And this time, they weren't here to beg for mercy. They were here to burn. The tremors grew heavier as the mech lumbered forward, each step hammering into the earth with a sound like distant thunder. Dust and debris flew up around it, and the sharp, whirring noise of its servos cutting through the smoky air made even the bravest Enforcers flinch. One of them fired a plasma bolt, the shot arcing toward the mech core, but the armor, thick and ugly with decades of patchwork repairs, absorbed the blast with nothing more than a scorched smear across its chest plate. In response, the mech's right arm swung up, a massive rotary cannon spinning to life with a mechanical growl and opened fire. The lead Enforcer was torn apart in a storm of ancient, brutal kinetic rounds. No energy weapons, no sleek tech, just heavy, primitive projectiles punching through shields and armor as if they were paper. The Enforcers broke ranks in a panic, scattering across the ruins as more human fighters flooded the battlefield. Each one a testament to the savage resilience that had outlasted every invasion Earth had ever suffered. Ror stumbled to the side, ducking behind a collapsed vehicle for cover. His vision blurred from blood loss, but he grinned through the pain. This was what Earth did best. Not grand battles of shining armies lined up on open fields. No, Earth fought dirty. Earth fought from the gutters, from the ashes, with teeth bared and fists swinging. The Enforcers had come expecting a slaughter, and they were getting one, but not the one they had imagined. A sharp cry rang out from his left, and Ror turned in time to see a group of human fighters spring an ambush from the ruins of a collapsed office tower. They used improvised explosives, homemade weapons, even old alien tech scavenged from earlier battles. One Enforcer trying to fire at the charging humans suddenly exploded into a cloud of smoke and shattered armor as a hidden mine rigged with stolen plasma cores detonated beneath him. Through the chaos, the Enforcer captain barked orders, trying desperately to reform a defensive perimeter. He shoved his subordinates into position, screaming at them in 3 different languages, but it was like trying to dam a river with bare hands. Every time they regrouped, another sniper shot cracked through the air. Another explosion rocked the ground. Another wave of human fighters surged forward. A woman in battered pilot armor vaulted from a rooftop, landing squarely on an Enforcer's back and driving a sharpened rebar spike into the gaps of his armor. She whooped with savage glee as the Enforcer toppled under her weight. Above it all, the mech kept advancing, its heavy footsteps beating the rhythm of inevitable defeat. Ror coughed again, blood flecking his lips, but he couldn't stop smiling. He could see it happening, the slow unraveling of the Enforcers' iron discipline. They weren't used to this kind of war. Their training was for clean operations, quick exterminations, overwhelming technological dominance. They didn't know how to fight an enemy that bled into the ruins, that became the ruins, that fought even when broken. The humans had no clean uniforms, no shining banners, no retreat plans. They fought because there was nowhere else to go. They fought because Earth was still their home, even in ashes. An enforcer broke away from the main group, trying to flank the humans, but was immediately swallowed up by a trap. A section of street, weakened by weeks of deliberate sabotage, gave way under his weight, and he plunged, screaming, into a pit lined with sharpened steel. Another tried to jetpack upward to gain high ground, only to be yanked from the sky by a net of monofilament wire stretched between two towers. He hit the ground hard and didn't rise again. The captain roared in frustration, firing blindly into the ruins, blasting apart buildings, cars, anything that moved. He didn't realize he was exposing himself until it was too late. A lone figure stepped into view, rifle steady, armor scorched, but functional. The shot was almost casual. A single slug punched through the captain's shoulder plate, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the pavement. He staggered back, clutching the wound, and stared at the human sniper with disbelief. Ror watched it all unfold, heart pounding with savage satisfaction. This was no longer a fight. This was a rout. The mech reached the center of the battlefield and knelt with a hiss of hydraulics, providing cover for the human fighters who swarmed around its armored legs like ants around a war elephant. Heavy missile pods opened along its back, launching a salvo into the retreating enforcers. The sky lit up with fire and smoke, buildings crumbling under the assault. Ror dragged himself to the mech's side, where a grizzled veteran with cybernetic arms hauled him up with surprising gentleness. The man's face was a road map of old scars, his eyes sharp and clear. Without a word, he handed Ror a fresh rifle and slapped him on the shoulder before vanishing back into the fray. Ror leaned against the mech, catching his breath. Around him, the humans were fighting like demons. Every ambush and strike honed to lethal efficiency. It wasn't just about winning. It was about sending a message. Earth wasn't broken. Earth wasn't conquered. Earth was the graveyard of conquerors. One enforcer, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, tried to activate a distress beacon. A wiry teenage fighter hurled a jagged chunk of concrete at his hand, shattering the device and his wrist. The enforcer screamed, a raw, ugly sound, and was silenced a moment later by a precise shot to the head. The humans pressed forward, relentless. Every inch the enforcers gave up, the humans took with blood and fury. No mercy, no negotiations. Ror watched as two enforcers managed to rally briefly, covering each other with overlapping fields of fire. But then an old subway tunnel rigged with explosives collapsed beneath them, swallowing them into darkness. It was a symphony of destruction, and the humans conducted it like maestros. The enforcer captain, wounded and furious, locked eyes with Ror across the battlefield. Hatred radiated from him like heat. He raised a plasma pistol with his good hand, aiming squarely at Ror's chest. But before he could fire, the mech's rotary cannon spun up again, and in a deafening roar, the captain was erased in a storm of lead and fire. Only smoking armor fragments remained, tumbling across the cracked asphalt. Ror sagged back against the mech, exhausted but exhilarated. He looked up at the ruined sky, watching as more dark shapes moved among the clouds. Not enforcer reinforcements. No, these were heavier, older human-built ships, their silhouettes battered, but proud. Earth's forgotten fleets hidden away during the first days of the invasion, now returning for the final fight. Ror let out a breathless laugh and wiped the blood from his mouth. Backup had arrived, and Earth wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The battlefield pulsed with the smell of ozone and scorched metal as the surviving enforcers scattered, retreating deeper into the ruins like rats. For a moment, there was a lull, a heavy silence broken only by the crackling of fires and the distant rumble of collapsing buildings. Ror watched them flee, leaning heavily on the battered mech's foot for support, every muscle trembling from exhaustion. But he knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Above the city, the dark silhouettes of Earth's hidden fleets grew larger, blocking out patches of the bruised sky. They weren't landing yet. No, they were waiting, watching, letting the ground forces bleed the enforcers dry before delivering the final hammer strike. Ror grinned, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and straightened painfully. He could feel it deep in his gut. Something bigger was coming. This wasn't just a random fight. This was the setup for something devastating. In the ruins ahead, a low mechanical whine cut through the smoky air. Ror squinted and caught sight of a large enforcer transport, half camouflaged under debris and fallen structures. The retreating enforcers weren't running randomly. They were falling back to it, rallying around their last piece of high-value equipment. If they reached it, they could regroup, bring in orbital support, maybe even glass the city to cover their retreat. That couldn't happen. Ror pushed off the mech with a grunt and stumbled toward the assembling fighters. The humans, bloodied but burning with adrenaline, turned their battered faces toward him. No formal salutes, no elaborate ranks anymore. They listened because they trusted survival instincts more than command structures. He pointed toward the wreckage. "They're pulling back to that transport," he rasped, voice rough with pain and smoke. "If they get it running, we're screwed." A stocky man with a plasma-scorched arm and a wicked grin nodded. "So we don't let him," he said simply. Another fighter, younger and quicker, slung a jury-rigged rocket launcher over her shoulder. "I've got enough boom to tear the engine block out of that thing," she said. Around them, the ragged soldiers tightened armor straps, checked weapons, swapped half-empty magazines. No hesitation, no fear, just grim, eager determination. They moved out like a wave of shadows, slipping through the ruins, using every collapsed building, every overturned vehicle, every cratered street as cover. The enforcers, busy trying to coordinate their retreat, didn't see them coming. Ror kept low, biting back groans as every step jarred his battered body. Ahead, the transport loomed larger. It was a monstrous thing. All sleek alien alloys and humming energy fields, armored thick enough to shrug off light artillery. But it had a weakness. Everything did. Ror's eyes narrowed, scanning the undercarriage, the engine intakes, the heat vents. He pointed to a series of glowing conduits along the spine of the transport. "There," he hissed. "Hit those, and she's not going anywhere." The fighter with the rocket launcher nodded once, crouching behind a chunk of masonry and adjusting her aim. Around them, other humans spread out, setting up crossfires, laying traps, preparing the kill box. Ror shifted position, dragging himself to a higher perch where he could see the whole field. His rifle felt like lead in his hands, but he cradled it close, breathing shallowly. Timing was everything now. Hit too early and the enforcers might scatter and regroup elsewhere. Hit too late and they'd punch through and escape. He watched as the enforcers herded their wounded toward the transport's open ramp, shouting orders, glancing nervously at the ruins around them. They knew they were vulnerable, but they didn't know just how badly. The rocket launcher fired with a deafening roar, the projectile streaking across the battlefield and slamming into the transport's spine. The explosion was spectacular. A bloom of blue-white energy engulfed the rear quarter of the transport, sending chunks of alien metal flying in all directions. The force of the blast knocked several enforcers off their feet. Instantly, the humans opened up from every side, rifles barking, grenades arcing through the air, plasma shouts sizzling. The enforcers tried to respond, but their confusion cost them precious seconds. Ror squeezed the trigger, picking off a retreating officer with a shot through the throat. All around him, the ruins came alive with gunfire and smoke. The enforcers fought back viciously, their weapons cutting down two human fighters who were too slow to find cover. Ror winced, but didn't break concentration. He directed the fire with shouted orders, guiding the humans to squeeze the enforcers into a tighter and tighter circle. Some of the aliens tried to make a break for it, sprinting for side alleys or wrecked vehicles, but trip mines and snipers waiting in the shadows picked them off mercilessly. It was brutal, dirty, and exactly the kind of fight humans had spent centuries perfecting. One of the enforcers, larger than the others and clad in heavy armor, broke through the line briefly, barreling toward Ror's position. His plasma cannon lit up with a savage hum, and Ror knew he wouldn't survive a direct hit. He didn't flinch. Instead, he triggered the charges planted earlier under the cracked pavement. The explosion launched the enforcer into the air like a ragdoll, slamming him hard against the side of the wrecked transport. The alien didn't get up. Ror wiped sweat and grime from his eyes, breathing heavily, his chest on fire from the effort. The battle raged for minutes that felt like lifetimes. One by one, the enforcers fell. Some fought to the last breath. Others tried to surrender, but the humans showed no mercy. They knew better than to take prisoners who might later call down orbital strikes. Ror's rifle ran dry, and he switched to a sidearm looted from an earlier fight. The alien weapon, unfamiliar but deadly. He fired until the barrel smoked and the magazine clicked empty. When the last enforcer dropped, the battlefield fell into an eerie, heavy silence. The transport burned brightly now. The engine a molten wreck. The sleek alien metal crumpled and blackened. Around it, the human fighters regrouped, dragging wounded comrades to cover, checking one another for injuries. Ror staggered down from his perch, his legs barely able to hold him. He met the eyes of the fighters gathering around him. No words were needed. They had done what needed to be done. The transport was lost, and with it, the enforcer's last hope of retreat. Ror slumped against a broken wall, letting his head tilt back toward the sky. Overhead, the dark shapes of Earth's fleets continued to descend, growing sharper and more menacing. Dropships peeled off from the main formations, hurtling toward the surface like avenging angels. Ror grinned despite the pain lancing through every fiber of his body. Earth wasn't dead. Earth wasn't beaten. Earth was answering. And soon, the enforcers would understand the cost of underestimating a wounded planet and its broken soldiers. Smoke curled from the ruined battlefield as Ror pushed himself upright once more, his entire body screaming in protest. His armor, if it could still be called that, was a patchwork of scorched plating and exposed wiring. Every step a gamble against gravity. But he moved anyway because the fight wasn't finished. The remaining enforcers, a handful of battered survivors, were scattering deeper into the ruins, desperate to avoid capture or death. Their cohesion was gone, replaced by pure survival instinct. They were abandoning the sleek arrogance that had once defined them, and now moved like cornered animals, snapping at shadows and flinching from every sound. Ror knew better than to let them slip away. If even one managed to escape and call down reinforcements from orbit, the bloody victory they had clawed from the dirt could turn to ashes in an instant. The human fighters regrouped quickly despite their wounds. They moved through the ruins in tight squads, communicating in hand signals and quick whispered orders. Every ruined building, every collapsed highway, every scorched alley was a perfect ambush point. This was no longer open warfare. This was a hunt, and the humans were the predators now. Ror led one of the teams personally, gritting his teeth against the stabbing pain in his side. His eyes, bloodshot and burning, never stopped scanning the rubble ahead. He knew the enforcers were strong. Even wounded, they were lethal. But fear had poisoned their minds now, and fear made mistakes inevitable. A shadow flickered across a shattered storefront ahead. Ror raised his rifle, the weapon steady despite the tremors in his muscles. He motioned for his squad to fan out, taking cover behind twisted steel and broken masonry. For a moment, there was only the whisper of the wind through the ruins. Then a plasma bolt screamed out, narrowly missing his head. Ror dove behind a crumpled vehicle, rolling to his stomach and returning fire. His shots were precise, aimed not to kill immediately, but to pin the enemy down, force them into moving where he wanted them to. Sure enough, the enforcer burst from cover moments later, running for a better position. He never made it. 3 human fighters opened up from concealed spots, riddling the enforcer with fire until he collapsed in a heap of sparking armor. Ror didn't pause. He pushed forward, leading the squad deeper into the ruins, following the trail of blood and scorched footprints. Every encounter was faster, uglier, more desperate. The enforcers fought like soldiers who knew they were already dead, but refused to fall quietly. In one brutal skirmish, an enforcer ripped through 2 human fighters before finally being brought down by a grenade tossed into the confined space where he had taken cover. Ror knelt now briefly by the fallen humans, their bodies broken but their faces peaceful, and murmured a rough promise to see this through. The hunt drove them toward the heart of the ruins, where the skeletal remains of old skyscrapers loomed like jagged teeth against the burning sky. It was there that the enforcers made their final stand. They had barricaded themselves in what remained of a public plaza, overturned concrete slabs, and wrecked alien vehicles, forming a crude fortress. Ror surveyed the position grimly. A frontal assault would be suicide. The enforcers still had enough firepower to hold off a direct charge, at least for a while. But holding ground was a mistake. It gave the humans time to do what they did best. He called for demolition charges, scavenged from the ruins, or ripped from enemy equipment. His fighters moved with grim efficiency, planting explosives at key structural points around the plaza. They worked silently, invisibly, like a cancer growing unseen. Meanwhile, Ror directed sniper teams to pick off any enforcer who strayed too far from cover, further tightening the noose. The enforcers returned fire sporadically, their shots wild and panicked, but the humans didn't engage fully. They just waited, patient as the ruins themselves. When everything was ready, Ror gave a single hand signal. The demolitions detonated almost simultaneously. Sections of the plaza collapsed, the barricades falling inward, trapping the enforcers in a shrinking kill zone. The shock wave knocked several off their feet, and before they could recover, the human fighters stormed in from every side. The battle was brutal and close quarters. A whirlwind of gunfire, knives, and fists. Plasma bolts burned through the air. Grenades shattered stone and bone alike, and the screams of the dying echoed off the ruined towers. Ror fought like a man possessed, his injuries forgotten in the haze of adrenaline and rage. He ducked under a wild swing from an enforcer's blade, driving his knife into the alien's exposed side, twisting viciously before pushing the body away and moving on. Around him, the humans fought with a ferocity that no training program could teach. A raw survival instinct born of centuries of hardship and defiance. For every human that fell, 3 enforcers followed. The last enforcer, battered and bleeding from a dozen wounds, dropped his weapon and raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Ror stared at him for a long moment, chest heaving. The plaza around them was littered with bodies, the ground slick with blood, the air thick with smoke and death. The enforcer said something in his alien tongue, the words pleading, desperate. Ror didn't understand the language, but he understood the meaning. He slowly holstered his pistol and took a step forward. The enforcer's shoulders sagged in relief. And then Ror drew his combat knife and drove it cleanly into the alien's chest, pushing him back against the shattered wall. The enforcer gasped once, a wet, gurgling sound, and then slid down the wall, lifeless. Ror stood over the body for a moment, breathing heavily, feeling no triumph, no satisfaction, only necessity. They had shown no mercy to Earth, and they would receive none in return. The humans gathered slowly, their numbers diminished, but their spirit unbroken. They formed a rough circle around Ror, their faces grim and battered, but shining with a fierce pride. Above them, the rumble of dropships descending grew louder. Earth's fleets were landing now, disgorging more troops, more armor, more firepower than the battered resistance could have ever hoped for. Ror turned his eyes skyward, watching as the first of the dropships touched down in the ruins, hatches opening to release soldiers in pristine armor, weapons gleaming. The newcomers looked around in shock at the devastation, at the battered fighters who had held the line against the enforcers with little more than grit and desperation. One of the officers, a clean-cut man with bright insignia on his chest, approached Ror and saluted sharply. Ror, covered in blood and soot, broken armor hanging off him in strips, just stared at him. After a moment, the officer lowered his hand awkwardly. "Captain Ror," he said formally, "reinforcements have arrived. The fleet stands ready. What are your orders?" Ror wiped blood from his mouth, spat into the dust, and smiled grimly. He turned toward the smoldering ruins beyond the plaza, where scattered enforcer strongpoints still held out, unaware that their fate was sealed. He rested his battered rifle on his shoulder, feeling the weight of it, the weight of the world he refused to surrender. "Simple," Ror said, voice raw, but steady. "We finish it." The ruins were silent except for the distant rumble of heavy engines and the soft dying crackle of fires left in the aftermath of the battle. Ror stood in the center of it all, his battered figure silhouetted against the broken skyline, feeling the cold bite of the wind against blood-soaked skin. Around him, the remnants of Earth's fighters moved carefully through the wreckage, checking for any surviving enemies and helping the wounded to safety. The new arrivals from the fleet moved with crisp efficiency, securing perimeters, setting up triage stations, and distributing supplies. But it was clear from their wide eyes and cautious steps that they understood something vital. The real victory hadn't been won by them. It had been carved out by the broken, bleeding soldiers who had refused to die long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Ror watched as the bodies of enforcers were dragged into a pile at the edge of the plaza, far from where the human dead were being honored with hastily built markers and whispered prayers. It wasn't about hatred anymore. It was about remembering. Every loss weighed heavy, every scar a silent promise that Earth would not forget the price of its survival. He forced his legs to move, walking among the wounded, stopping here and there to clasp a hand, to murmur a few rough words of gratitude or encouragement. The fighters responded with tired smiles, some nodding, some too exhausted to do more than blink. They didn't need speeches. They had lived the truth of it. They had fought for every breath, every inch of ground, and they knew without needing to be told what they had accomplished. Overhead, the dark hulls of Earth's warships hovered like ancient gods reborn, the sky trembling with their presence. Dropships continued to descend, and with them came a new generation of soldiers, engineers, medics, all pouring into the ruins like a river of life into a land of death. Ror found himself standing before one of the officers again, the same clean-cut man from earlier, who now looked far less certain, as if finally realizing the enormity of what he had stepped into. The officer saluted again, more subdued this time, and spoke in a lower voice. "Sir, Command is asking for a full report. They want to know the status of the city, the enemy forces, resistance, strength. They want recommendations on next steps." Ror stared at him for a long moment, then let out a low, rough laugh that was more a breath than sound. He turned his gaze to the shattered cityscape, to the blackened bones of the world he had fought to protect, and shook his head slowly. Recommendations. As if there was anything left to recommend except the simplest truth. He looked back at the officer, voice gravelly but clear. "Tell them the city's broken but alive. Tell them the enemy is shattered but dangerous. Tell them Earth doesn't need saving anymore. We're past that. Now it's our turn." The officer hesitated, clearly uncertain how to relay that to the distant figures of command who sat behind polished desks and clean, unscarred bunkers. Ror didn't care. He turned away, moving back toward the mech that had fought beside them, now resting like a sleeping titan in the middle of the wreckage, its armor scarred, but still proud. A crowd had gathered there, not just the fighters, but civilians, too. Those who had survived by hiding in underground shelters and collapsed buildings. They emerged now like ghosts, tentative and pale, blinking at the light and the unfamiliar presence of soldiers who weren't enforcers. Children clung to their mothers. Old men leaned on broken staffs. Wounded civilians hobbled forward on makeshift crutches. Ror's heart twisted at the sight, but it also hardened. These were the people he had fought for. Not the politicians in orbit, not the generals drawing lines on maps, but these tired, stubborn survivors who had clung to life even when everything else had been ripped away. One of the civilians, a wiry man with a burned face and a steel rod replacing part of his left leg, stepped forward. He looked Ror in the eye and spoke in a voice that was both broken and unbowed. "Is it over?" Ror thought about that for a moment. Thought about the fleets still maneuvering above, about the remnants of enforcer forces scattered across the planet, about the long bloody road that still lay ahead. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he said. "But it's ours now, and we're not giving it back." The man nodded once, a small, sharp gesture of understanding, and turned back to the crowd. Words spread quickly, carried in whispers and murmured prayers, and the civilians began to move with a little more purpose, a little more hope. Ror watched them go, feeling something deep in his chest loosened for the first time in what felt like years. They had survived. That meant they could rebuild. That meant Earth still had a future. The officer returned a moment later, face tight. "Sir, Command confirms. Full planetary operations authorized. Earth is under our control again. Orders are to consolidate and prepare for counteroffensive strikes against remaining enemy assets." Ror nodded absently, his mind already moving ahead, already planning the next steps. He would rest when it was truly over. Not before. He looked toward the distant horizon where the last pockets of resistance still flickered like dying fires. "Good," he said softly. "Because I'm not finished." The officer hesitated, then asked almost reluctantly, "Do you want a medical evac, sir?" "You're wounded." Ror laughed again, a short, dry sound. He glanced down at his battered body, at the blood drying on cracked armor, at the trembling in his limbs. Wounded didn't even begin to cover it, but he shook his head. "I didn't fight to be carried away from this," he said. "I'll walk out when it's done." Without another word, He slung his battered rifle over his shoulder and began limping toward the edge of the ruins, toward the next fight, the next stand, the next impossible battle waiting to be won. Around him, the fighters who had bled and survived alongside him moved to follow. A tide of human defiance rising to meet whatever came next. Behind them, the mech rumbled to life once more, its engines growling as it rose to its feet. Above, the clouds parted slightly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, a beam of sunlight pierced the gloom, bathing the ruins in pale golden light. Ror felt it on his face, felt the warmth of it sink into his bones, and allowed himself a rare moment of peace. Earth was wounded, scarred, broken, but it was alive. And as long as it breathed, so would they all. Backup had come. Earth had answered. And now it was the galaxy's turn to learn what happened when you tried to break something that refused to die. And with that, we have reached the end of the story, but stories don't end here. If you like the story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel so you receive all the new content. And if you have an opinion or something that caught your attention, leave a comment and let's discuss together. I'm waiting for your opinions, and see you in the next story. Bye.